The air in the gallery was thin and tasted of ozone and condescension. It was the permanent atmosphere of the Citadel, the Consortium's Nexus Station, a place where gravity was a suggestion and politeness was a weapon. I stood by the plinth, adjusting the cuff of my plain gray tunic, my designation Elias Vance, Junior Cultural Archivist, Sector 7G feeling less like a title and more like an apology. All around me, beings of staggering diversity milled with a uniform, practiced grace. There were the Lord Jahan, crystalline entities whose thoughts chimed like faint bells, their bodies shimmering under the gallery's simulated daylight. There were the hulking Kuroth, encased in biological armor that steamed gently in the cool air. Their deep, rumbling speech patterns translated into flat monotone by the ubiquitous silver discs pinned to their chests. And then there was the Arbiter, Xylos, a member of the progenitor race that had founded the Consortium. He was a creature of impossible length and elegance, his form somewhere between a serpent and a flowing ribbon of liquid shadow, his face a smooth, featureless mask from which his voice emerged, impossibly resonant and perpetually amused. He drifted toward me, the low hum of his personal anti-grav field a subtle reminder of his station. "Archivist Vance," he said, the word archivist drawn out, as if savoring a particularly quaint and harmless term. "A momentous evening, the culmination of your species' journey." His gaze swept across the hall, across the floating holographic displays of Earth's greatest artistic achievements, curated by my own hand. The Mona Lisa's smile hung next to a swirling Van Gogh. A Mozart symphony was translated into a cascade of light. A Shakespearean sonnet scrolled in elegant, universal script. To them, it was a collection of charming curiosities, the final, neatly packaged evidence that humanity was tamed, civilized, profitable. "We are honored, Arbiter," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. The words were ash in my mouth. For 50 standard years, since the Consortium had welcomed us, we had played this part. We were the chaotic, passionate primitives, the artists and poets of the galaxy, a species that had nearly destroyed itself countless times before the Consortium's benevolent hand had guided us toward the light of peaceful commerce and interstellar stability. We provided culture, cheap industrial labor, and a fascinatingly tragic history for their academics to dissect. In return, they gave us their technology, their protection, and their pity. It was a gilded cage, and we had thanked them for the bars. That was the first lie. I looked at the art they so admired, the fruits of our pain and our joy, and I saw not just beauty, but data. Every brush stroke was a calculation. Every note of music was a frequency. Every word of poetry was a variable in an equation they couldn't even see. For 2 generations, Earth had been silent. We had learned their systems, their networks, their languages. We studied their trade routes, their military deployments, their political alliances. We watched them pacify worlds not with fleets, but with contracts, drowning entire civilizations in debt and dependency until their own culture was just another commodity to be cataloged and sold in galleries like this one. They thought our history of warfare was a symptom of a juvenile species. They never considered it might be the galaxy's most extensive field manual. "Your speech," the Arbiter continued, his formless face somehow conveying an expression of paternalistic encouragement. "I trust it will be appropriately grateful." It is important to remind everyone of the progress you have made, from warring tribes to productive members of the galactic economy. He gestured to a display showing images of Earth's 21st century fire, smoke, soldiers, and ruins. From that to this, a remarkable transformation. My gaze lingered on the image of a bombed-out city. To them, it was a scar. To us, it was a foundation. History is a powerful teacher, arbiter, I said, my voice quiet. We learned its lessons well. He made a sound like shifting sand, which the translator rendered as a chuckle. Indeed. Now, if you will excuse me, the delegates from the Cygnus Combine are eager to discuss the new trade tariffs on your system's water exports. He glided away, a predator cloaked in the silks of diplomacy, leaving me alone with the ghosts of my world. The water they were tariffing was being used to cool their starship cores, while entire regions on Earth were still recovering from consortium-mandated agricultural shifts that had led to desertification. Gratitude. Yes, I would give them gratitude. The chimes sounded, signaling the start of the formal presentation. The low chatter of a dozen languages died down as the assembled delegates turned their attention to the central podium. I took a deep breath, the sterile air doing nothing to calm the storm in my chest, and walked toward the light. I felt their eyes on me, the collective gaze of a galaxy that saw me as a pet, a project, a success story. They saw a meek little man in a gray tunic, the perfect symbol of a domesticated species. They didn't see the implant behind my ear, a sliver of human-made quantum-entangled circuitry that connected me to a place none of their deep space probes had ever found. They didn't see the generations of planning that had led to this single moment. I stepped onto the podium and cleared my throat. The room was silent. Distinguished delegates, honored arbiter, members of the consortium, I began, my voice amplified throughout the hall. On behalf of Earth and its people, I extend our deepest gratitude for this celebration. I recited the prepared script, the words polished and hollow, every syllable a carefully constructed misdirection. I spoke of peace, of prosperity, of the wisdom of the consortium in guiding us away from our self-destructive past. I saw the arbiter nod slowly, his shadowy form radiating satisfaction. I was playing my part perfectly. The consortium has taught us that history need not be a weapon, I continued, my eyes scanning the crowd, that the scars of the past can be healed and its lessons curated for the edification of all. I paused, letting the silence stretch just a beat too long. A flicker of something impatience perhaps crossed the face of a Kuroth delegate. But in its curation, I said, my voice dropping slightly, the consortium has been selective. You have marveled at our art, but you have filed away our fury. You have studied our peace treaties, but you have archived our pain. You believe you have seen our soul in our sonnets and our symphonies. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edges of the podium. You are mistaken. Our soul was never in the art. It was in the artists, in the survivors, in the strategists, and the soldiers and the schemers who clawed their way through the blood and fire of our history so that we could be standing here today in this beautiful, sterile gallery. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the speech they were expecting. The arbiter's form went rigid. Archivist. His voice cut through the air. A sharp warning. I ignored him. You studied our wars, But you never understood our warriors. You saw them as relics of a past we have transcended." I smiled then, a thin, cold smile that felt utterly alien on my face. "We did not transcend our past. Arbiter, we weaponized it." And then I spoke the code phrase, a line from a long-dead Terran poet, a man who knew a thing or two about cages. Let them see the mind forged. The implant behind my ear flared with a cold fire. In that instant, every system in the gallery was ours. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hall into a shocking, absolute darkness. A few panicked cries echoed in the blackness before the emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in a blood-red glow. But the holographic displays were no longer showing Earth's gentle art. The Mona Lisa was gone. The scrolling sonnets had vanished. In their place, on every wall, was a single, terrifying, live feed. It showed a cavern, a vast, subterranean space, not carved from rock, but from the fused wreckage of a city, my city, a place called Sarajevo, a name that meant nothing to them, but everything to us. The space was filled not with soldiers or tanks, but with light, a sprawling island web of crystalline conduits and pulsating neural cabling, stretching for miles in every direction. At the heart of it all, floating in a containment field of shimmering energy, were thousands upon thousands of small, dark nodes. And as we watched, they began to wake up. Light flared within them, one by one at first, then in a cascade. Each spark was a mind, not a copy, not an AI, but the preserved consciousness of one of humanity's greatest and most ruthless strategic thinkers, every military genius, every revolutionary, every philosopher of conflict, pulled from the brink of death across 4,000 years of recorded history and archived. Sun Tzu, Alexander, Caesar, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Oppenheimer, countless names they had never bothered to learn, whose treatises they dismissed as barbaric literature. This was Project Mimazan, our history, our rage, our memory, sharpened into a weapon. The gallery erupted. The Lord Jahan's chiming thoughts became a panicked shriek of static. The Kuroth guards lumbered forward, their weapons powering up with an angry hum. The Arbiter's shadowy form coalesced directly in front of me, his voice no longer amused, but filled with a cold, distilled fury. "What is this? Vance, what is the meaning of this abomination?" I stepped down from the podium, the emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows around me. "You call it an abomination," I said calmly, my voice now my own. "We call it our parliament. You wanted to understand humanity. Then you should have studied all of it, not just the pretty parts you could hang on a wall." On the screens, the network of minds reached full activation. The light coalesced, forming a single, blinding nexus. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a superweapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was a billion years of cumulative strategic thought, unified and focused into a single, conscious entity. The Arbiter raised a hand, and a wave of pure kinetic force slammed into me, throwing me back against the podium. "You are a primitive species, playing with forces you cannot comprehend," he hissed. "This display is over. Your world will be quarantined. Your parliament will be dismantled." But as his guards moved to surround me, a new alert flashed on the main view screen, an emergency broadcast from the Citadel's own command network. One of the consortium's patrol destroyers, The stalwart shield, stationed at the edge of the Sol system, had just gone dark, not destroyed, not damaged. Its navigation, communication, and weapon systems had simultaneously and inexplicably been rendered inert. They were adrift, blind, and helpless. On the feed from Mnemosyne, a single tendril of light pulsed, a silent testament to the network's first act. It hadn't fired a shot. It had simply outthought the destroyer's combat AI, running 1,000 concurrent strategic simulations in the time it took the ship's computer to process a single command, and feeding it a logic paradox so perfect and so profound that the AI had simply shut itself down. I looked up at the Arbiter from the floor, a trickle of blood running from my lip. "We comprehend them perfectly," I said, my voice rasping. "We are not playing with these forces. We are these forces. Welcome to the new history lesson. Arbiter. Class is now in session." The Arbiter's kinetic blast felt less like an impact and more like a physical argument. One I had definitively lost. The air crackled where his invisible power had struck, and for a moment, the only sound was the ringing in my ears and the thud of my own heart against my ribs. But the chaos returned in a wave. The Kuroth guards, their faces impassive behind polished obsidian visors, advanced with the slow, inevitable certainty of glaciers. Their plasma carbines were leveled at my chest, the low thrum of their power cells a promise of swift, efficient violence. Xylos drifted forward, his shadowy form seeming to absorb the red emergency light, making him a hole in the fabric of the room. "Cease this madness, Archivist," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous thing. "Sever your connection to this weapon. Do it now, and perhaps your species can be salvaged. Defy me, and I will personally oversee the glassing of your world, starting with the historical site you seem to hold so dear." The threat was meant to paralyze me, to sever my will from my purpose, but he didn't understand. I wasn't the operator. I was the conduit. The thoughts of Mnemosyne were not a voice in my head, but a current in my blood, a cold, clear stream of pure logic and millennia of strategic precedent. There was no panic, no fear, only the calm assessment of variables. Threat assessment credible, but premature. The consensus of 1,000 dead generals flowed through me. Consortium military doctrine prioritizes stability above retribution. A public, punitive strike against Earth would destabilize regional confidence. Xylos is bluffing. Proceed to Phase 2. "It's too late for threats. Arbiter," I said, pushing myself to my feet, my body aching. "You've spent 50 years telling us to learn from our history. We finally did. The problem is, you only gave us access to the approved chapters." As the first Kuroth reached for me, its massive three-fingered hand extended to restrain. A new set of alerts began to chime throughout the gallery. Not military alerts this time, but economic ones. On the few screens not dominated by the glowing neural web of Mnemosyne, the symbol for the Galactic Standard Unit, the GSU, began to flash an urgent, angry red. The delegates, momentarily frozen by the military standoff, now began to cry out in genuine alarm, their personal data slates lighting up with catastrophic news. The galactic markets were in free fall. It had started subtly. A single, insignificant algorithm trading in bulk agricultural futures from a backwater system had been compromised. It executed a series of seemingly irrational trades, creating a minor ripple. But that ripple was a stone cast into a pond, its timing and placement calculated with the precision of a master Go player. It triggered other automated trading algorithms, which triggered others, a domino effect of cascading panic that Mnemosyne had predicted to the 7th decimal point. Currencies devalued, long-term bonds collapsed. The entire, impossibly complex economic machine of the consortium, built on a carefully maintained illusion of perpetual growth and stability, was having a fatal seizure. The arbiter's head snapped toward the panicked delegates. He had expected a battle of weapons and warships, a conflict he understood and could dominate. He was not prepared for a war fought on the abstract battlefields of economic theory and high-frequency trading. He had brought a sword to a chess match. "What have you done?" he snarled, turning back to me. His composure was cracking, the mask of amused superiority giving way to the raw fury of a king who had just found his castle was built on sand. "This is not war. This is chaos. To you?" "Perhaps," I replied, a ghost of a smile on my lips as the Kuroth guards finally grabbed my arms, their grip like iron. "To us, it's just another Tuesday. We've had a dozen global economic collapses. We studied them. We learned the patterns. We know where the load-bearing walls of a civilization are. Arbiter, and yours are made of paper." I offered no resistance as they dragged me from the gallery. This, too, was part of the plan. A captured pawn deep in enemy territory is the most dangerous piece on the board. They took me through the Citadel's pristine corridors, past floating service drones and bewildered officials, to the station's secured detention block. The cell was a masterpiece of minimalist cruelty, a seamless white cube, bathed in a soft, constant light, with no visible corners and a floor that was just yielding enough to be perpetually unsettling. They stripped me of my tunic, leaving me in a simple gray jumpsuit. A medical drone hummed into the room, its metallic claws extending with scanners and needles. They were looking for the implant, the physical link. They thought they could simply cut it out, sever the head of the snake. They found it. Of course, a tiny dark sliver just behind my right ear. As the drone's surgical laser whirred to life, I closed my eyes. They are targeting the hardware. The silent current of Mnemosyne flowed. Predictable. Let them. The connection is not physical. It is quantum. It is conceptual. While they focus on the keyhole, we will open the door. The laser sliced into my skin. The pain was sharp, electric, but it was distant, happening to a body that was merely a temporary vessel. As the drone carefully extracted the small chip of human technology, the Arbiter's voice filled the cell, piped in through some hidden speaker. "It is done, Archivist. Your little rebellion is over. The markets will be stabilized. The destroyer will be rebooted, and you will spend the rest of your short, miserable life in this room, telling us everything you know." There was a pause, and I could almost feel his expectant silence, waiting for my spirit to break. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the drone's optical sensor. "You think you've won, Xylos?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You just cut a wire. You can't cut an idea." And across the galaxy, the doors opened. Mnemosyne, freed from the constraints of broadcasting its existence through a single, obvious feed, unleashed Phase 3. It wasn't an attack. It was a release, a truth bomb. For 50 years, the consortium had maintained the Galactic Archive, a repository of all known history, culture, and science. It was their greatest tool of control. a curated and censored version of reality. Namazani didn't hack the archive. It simply unlocked it. Suddenly, every species with access to the Galactic network received a flood of data. The original, unedited historical records. The Lord Jahan saw the initial contact reports, which detailed not a benevolent uplift, but a calculated corporate takeover of their planet's mineral rights. Their crystalline ancestors classified not as sentient beings, but as geological assets. The Kuroth, who had been taught that a genetic plague had rendered most of their species sterile, now saw the consortium internal memos detailing the development and deployment of that very plague, a preventative measure to keep their population from becoming a demographic threat. Every lie, every half-truth, every brutal act of colonial exploitation disguised as peaceful integration was laid bare. The suppressed histories of 100 worlds, the secret treaties, the redacted casualty reports, the real cost of the consortium's stability. It was all there, a torrent of undeniable truth flooding the galaxy. On the Citadel, I could feel the shockwave of that revelation. The calm, orderly hum of the station was replaced by a rising cacophony of alarms, of shouted commands, of pure, undiluted panic. The Arbiter's voice was gone. He was no longer concerned with a single human prisoner in a white room. He was trying to stop his entire civilization from tearing itself apart. The medical drone in my cell froze, its programming paralyzed by a flood of conflicting directives from the station's central command. I sat on the unsettling floor, the blood from the incision behind my ear trickling down my neck, and I listened to the sound of an empire beginning to crumble. The minds within me were silent now, their work done for the moment. There was no elation, no sense of victory. There was only the chilling, absolute certainty of a mathematical proof. We had presented the variables. The galaxy would now solve the equation. A few hours later, the door to my cell hissed open. It was not the Arbiter who stood there, but a Lord Jahan, its crystalline form shimmering with a furious, fractured light. It was accompanied by two others. They were not Citadel guards. Their facets were sharp, unpolished, and they carried weapons I recognized from the Forbidden Archive's ceremonial energy glaives, repurposed for war. The lead Lord Jahan's thoughts chimed in my mind, no longer faint and melodic, but sharp and clear as breaking glass. You are the voice of the great unforgetting. You have given us back our pain. Now, you will help us forge it into a sword. I stood up, feeling the cold certainty of the path ahead. We hadn't just started a war with the consortium. We had started 100 of them. The gilded cage was broken, and all the animals were finally remembering they had claws. The Lord Jahan's name, as best I could comprehend it through the shimmering chime of its thoughts, was Xylar. It had been a historian, a fellow archivist, one of the many beings I had exchanged pleasantries and professionally courteous nods with in the Citadel's halls. Now, it was a revolutionary. Its crystalline body, usually a symphony of calm, blues and greens, was now shot through with jagged streaks of angry crimson. The energy glaives its companions held were not the ornamental relics I had catalogued. They thrummed with a live, hungry power, casting flickering shadows that danced like angry spirits on the white walls of my cell. The progenitor's lie. Xylar's thoughts cut through the air, sharp and precise. The Citadel is compromised. Their security protocols are in chaos. The Kuroth have seized the primary armory. The delegates from the Vega Drift are broadcasting open calls for secession. Your single act has shattered the looking glass. I followed them out of the detention block. The Citadel was a different world. The serene, orderly corridors were now scenes of frantic activity and simmering violence. Consortium enforcers in their sleek silver armor were trying to form defensive perimeters, but they were being overwhelmed by their own diversity. Lord Jahan were refusing to obey Q-Roth commanders. Signian technicians were locking progenitor officials out of their own systems. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the consortium was dissolving in real time, species by species, a mutiny born not of a conspiracy, but of a shared, sudden, and unbearable truth. My role had changed. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a symbol, a living embodiment of the data bomb that had fractured their reality. As we moved through the chaos, beings would stop and stare. Some looked at me with a dawning, terrifying hope. Others with a venomous hatred. I was the whisper that had started the avalanche. Xylar led me not towards an escape pod or a stolen ship, but deeper into the Citadel, towards its heart. Our destination was the nexus of communications, the central hub through which all interstellar data flowed. It was the brain of the consortium, and it was under siege. We arrived to find the Grand Plaza before the Nexus transformed into a makeshift battlefield. Kuroth warriors, their biological armor steaming, had formed a barricade of overturned statues and service droids. They were exchanging fire with a squad of progenitor enforcers who had taken cover behind a series of ornamental planters that now served as fortifications, plasma bolts, designed for crowd control but deadly at close range, sizzled through the air. The air tasted of burnt plasteel and ozone. The progenitors are attempting to initiate a system-wide data purge, Xylar explained, its thoughts a grim counterpoint to the chaos. They want to erase the truth again, bury it under a new layer of lies. We cannot allow that. It gestured with a faceted limb towards a service conduit running along the ceiling. We will not fight their battle. We will change the battlefield. This was the human way. Not the frontal assault, but the flank, the feint, the asymmetrical strike. The lessons of 1,000 guerrilla wars, 1,000 insurgencies fought in jungles and deserts and bombed out cities, were now being applied in the sterile corridors of a galactic superstructure. While the Q-Roth pinned the enforcers with brute force, our small group slipped into the service tunnels, a dark, labyrinthine world of cabling and humming machinery that was the Citadel's true circulatory system. The current of mnemosiny flowed through me again, not as a voice, but as an instinct, a map. It saw the schematics of the station not as a blueprint, but as a living anatomy. It knew the weak points, the arteries, the nerve clusters. It guided my steps, telling me which junction to take, which power relay to avoid. We emerged inside the Nexus itself. The chamber was a vast sphere, its walls a living tapestry of light and data. Streams of information flowing in 1 billion different colors. In the center, suspended by grav lifts, were 3 progenitor technicians, their long, shadowy forms frantically manipulating holographic controls, their focus absolute as they tried to contain the data plague we had unleashed. They were so intent on their task, they didn't notice us until Xylar's glaive hummed to life. The first progenitor turned, its featureless face registering a flicker of surprise an instant before a wave of shimmering energy cut through its grav lift, sending it tumbling into the abyss below the central platform. The other 2 reacted instantly, shimmering force fields erupting around them as they drew slender, rod-like weapons. This was not a fight I could win with my fists. My body was a fragile, human thing. But my mind was a legion. Analysis progenitor personal shields operate on a harmonic frequency. They can repel singular, high-energy impacts. They are vulnerable to multi-vector, low-intensity resonance. The thought wasn't mine, but it was clear as day. It was the synthesized insight of a long-dead Terran physicist who'd specialized in wave mechanics, cross-referenced with the tactical analysis of a Napoleonic artillery captain. "The shields," I shouted to the Lord Jahan over the rising hum of the progenitor's weapons. "They can't block everything at once. We need to overload them with noise." Xylar understood immediately. It and its two companions began to strike the platform, the walls, the control consoles, not with the cutting edges of their glaives, but with the flat sides, unleashing waves of unfocused, chaotic energy. The air filled with a discordant symphony of clashing frequencies. The progenitor's shields began to flicker, struggling to adapt to the omnidirectional assault. While they were distracted, I ran. My target was the central console, the master control for the entire galactic network. It was a swirling vortex of light, beautiful and utterly alien. I had no idea how to operate it, but Namazana did. I plunged my hands into the holographic interface. The sensation was like being submerged in ice and fire at once. Data flooded my senses, not as images or text, but as pure, raw concepts. I wasn't reading it. I was experiencing it. The birth of stars, the coded language of genetics, the complex mathematics of FTL travel, the private, encrypted correspondence of the Arbiter himself, and woven through it all, the cold, clear consciousness of my parliament. They are initiating the purge sequence from a remote location. The command is encrypted with a quantum key. We cannot break it. Therefore, we must redirect it. The logic was flawless, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. We couldn't stop the bullet, so we would aim the gun. My fingers flew across the controls, guided by 1,000 dead geniuses. I was not deleting files or erecting firewalls. I was fundamentally rewriting the rules of the network itself. I was turning the consortium's greatest weapon into a mirror. The purge command arrived, a spike of pure, destructive code designed to wipe the archives clean. But instead of hitting its intended target, my redirected protocols caught it, amplified it, and turned it back on its source. The target was no longer the public archives. The target was the progenitor's private, encrypted servers, the Black Ledger, the real history, the one even the consortium's allies and most trusted servants were not allowed to see, the one that detailed their own origins. On the main view screen of the Nexus, a new file opened, unlocked by their own purge key. It was not text. It was a star chart, ancient and faded. It showed a galaxy, but not our own. It showed a species, humanoid, but impossibly ancient and frail, huddled on a dying world. And then it showed the ships. They were not progenitor vessels. They were vast, biological, and utterly alien, things of nightmare and geometry that defied physics. The logs detailed the arrival of these entities, the architects, the builders, the shapers. They did not conquer the dying world. They harvested it. They took the frail, dying species and changed them, twisted them, augmented them, stripped them of their weaknesses, their emotions, their history, and forged them into a tool, into viceroys, into caretakers for this galactic preserve, the progenitors, the founders of the consortium, the self-proclaimed masters of the galaxy, were nothing more than glorified servants. Genetically engineered, memory-wiped slaves, left behind to manage the experiment. The final entry in the log was a single, chilling sentence, a standing order from the Shapers. When the anomalies evolve beyond predicted parameters, sterilize the experiment and await our return. In the heart of the Nexus, the two remaining progenitors froze. Their weapons clattered to the floor. The data stream was being broadcast on every open channel, on every frequency, to every corner of their shattered empire. Their entire identity, their claim to divinity, their very reason for being, was a lie, and the anomaly humanity had just evolved far beyond any parameter they could have imagined. And in that moment of shared, galaxy-wide horror, a new signal appeared. It was faint, distant, but impossibly powerful. An energy signature unlike anything in the consortium's databases. It was coming from the dark space between galaxies, and it was moving very, very fast. The sterilization protocol had been triggered. The Shapers were coming home. The silence in the Nexus was a living thing, a profound, galaxy-wide intake of breath. The plasma fire outside had ceased. The shouts and alarms had faded. All that remained was the hum of the Citadel's life support and the chilling, implacable ping of the incoming signal. It was a death knell echoing from the void. The two progenitor technicians stood like statues carved from shadow, their featureless faces turned toward the star chart, a monument to their own irrelevance. The truth hadn't just broken their morale, it had deleted their entire sense of self. They were a lie, and the proof was broadcasting from their own sacred servers. Xylar and its companions lowered their glaives, the crimson fury in their crystalline forms giving way to a cold, translucent dread. Even the rage of 100 betrayed worlds felt insignificant in the face of this new, existential horror. The Shapers, the name itself, felt like a violation, a word that shouldn't be spoken. We had thought we were fighting our jailers, only to discover they were just fellow prisoners, entrusted with the keys. And we had just rung the Master's dinner bell. Threat analysis inconclusive. The stream from mnemosiny flowed through me. It was the first time I had ever felt a flicker of uncertainty from the collective. No data. No precedent. The enemy is a ghost. We are operating blind. For the first time, the chorus of 1,000 geniuses fell silent, confronted by a problem with no historical analog. This wasn't a war. It was an extinction event. We had to adapt. Xylar, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. The Purge command. Is it still active? The Lord Jahan turned its head. A slow, deliberate movement. The protocol is complete. The progenitor's private network is erased. In its place is only the truth. Then we use it, I said, a desperate impossible idea forming in my mind, an idea born of human defiance, of the stubborn refusal to simply lie down and die. We broke their network with truth. Now we will forge a new one with it. Send a message to everyone, the Kuroth, the Signans, every species that has seen the lie. Tell them what's coming, not as a warning, as an invitation. Xylar's thoughts were a complex chime of disbelief and dawning comprehension. An alliance. Now many of these species are at each other's throats down in the plaza. Good, I said, turning back to the swirling console. Then they're already warmed up. We don't have time for trust falls and peace treaties. We need a new consortium, a real one, a war council, and it starts right now. I plunged my hands back into the light. This time, I wasn't redirecting code. I was writing it, guided by the strategic minds of Mnemosyne, who had now moved past their initial shock and were processing the new reality with cold, terrifying efficiency. I began to build. We took the shattered remnants of the consortium's network and repurposed it. We created secure, encrypted channels, linking the fleets and military commands of the newly seceded worlds. We bypassed the political leadership, the panicked delegates, and sent the information directly to the generals, the fleet admirals, the warrior castes. The message was simple. Your creators are coming to unmake you. The progenitors are a failed experiment. Humanity is the unsanctioned variable. The choice is simple: die alone as their tools, or fight with us and die free. It was the ultimate gamble. We were asking species who had been rivals or subjects for centuries to unite behind a primitive upstart race they barely understood. But our greatest weapon was the one we had just deployed: the truth. The progenitor's lie was so profound, so all-encompassing, that it had become a universal solvent, dissolving old allegiances and forging new ones in the crucible of shared betrayal. The responses came slowly at first, then in a flood. A Kuroth battle fleet, already en route to its home system to enforce a new military junta, changed course. Its gruff, pragmatic admiral sent a single, unencrypted message: "The enemy of my enemy is a temporary inconvenience I am willing to tolerate." Send targeting data. The Cygnus Combine, a notoriously isolationist and technologically advanced race of cyborgs, opened a channel. Their machine-filtered voices were devoid of emotion, but their message was clear. The Shaper's return represents a logical paradox. A system cannot be maintained by its own negation. We will assist in the preservation of the system. For now, ship by ship, fleet by fleet, a new alliance was being born from the ashes of the old. It was a motley, desperate armada, united by nothing more than a shared enemy and a common desire to exist. While the new alliance formed in the digital realm, the Citadel remained a powder keg. We had to secure it. It was the only Galactic-class command and control center we had. "The Enforcers," I said to Xylar. "The progenitor troops in the plaza." They saw the message. "What are they doing?" Xylar's facets shimmered as it accessed the station's internal sensors. "They are holding their positions, but they are not fighting. They are communicating with the Kuroth. They are negotiating." The progenitor soldiers, warriors bred for loyalty, had been given a truth their minds couldn't reconcile. Their gods were frauds. Their purpose was a lie. They were faced with a choice: obey the last, meaningless orders of their broken masters, or face the cosmic horror that was coming for them. 2. It was a human dilemma, and, for the first time, they were forced to answer it. The Arbiter, Xylos, appeared on the Nexus view screen. His image was grainy, broadcast from a secure location deep within the Citadel's governmental spire. The paternalistic amusement was gone forever, replaced by a hollow, echoing despair. The shadow was finally showing its true shape, that of a frightened child. Human. His voice was a strained whisper. "What you have done. You have doomed us all. The Shapers cannot be fought. They do not conquer. They edit. They will unmake reality itself to erase their error. Then we'll have to become an error they can't delete, I countered, my voice hard. Your race has a choice. Arbiter, you can be the footnote in their logbook, the failed experiment that was corrected. Or you can be the ones who helped us burn the whole lab down. He didn't answer. The screen went blank. But a few minutes later, the progenitor enforcers in the plaza powered down their weapons and stepped back from the barricades. The battle for the Citadel was over. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled over the station. We had our command center. Now we had to prepare for a war against gods. The next few hours were a blur of frantic creation, guided by mnemosony. We turned the Citadel into the heart of a galactic defense. We pooled resources, shared technologies. The Signan's advanced shield harmonics were merged with the Kuroth's expertise in kinetic bombardment. The Lord Jahan's mastery of crystalline data storage was used to create unhackable communication relays and humanity. We provided the strategy, the dirty, asymmetrical, unpredictable tactics that a race of cosmic gardeners would never anticipate. We didn't plan to meet their fleet in open space. That would be suicide. Instead, we prepared traps. We seeded entire star systems with self-replicating minefields that mimicked the signature of asteroid belts. We prepared FTL inhibitors to drag their fleet out of hyperspace into the heart of a volatile nebula. And we designed our masterpiece, our final, desperate gambit, the Mimosan Gambit. We couldn't outfight them, but perhaps we could outthink them. We would use the entirety of the Mimosan network, the combined intellect of humanity's most brilliant and ruthless minds, to launch a direct psychic and logical assault on the Shapers themselves, a mimetic virus. An idea so powerful, so paradoxical, so fundamentally human that it might just crash their ancient, orderly consciousness. The idea was simple and utterly insane. We were going to teach them doubt. The Shaper fleet arrived. It wasn't a fleet in any conventional sense. It was a single, monolithic object, a crescent of black, non-reflective material so vast it eclipsed the local star. It didn't have engines or weapons emplacements. It simply existed, and its presence warped the space around it. Our traps, our minefields, our FTL inhibitors, it ignored them all. It didn't travel through space. It seemed to unfold it, moving from one point to another without crossing the distance between. The ship, if it could be called that, stopped at the edge of the system, a silent, patient god. Then it began its work. It didn't fire a laser or launch a missile. A wave of something not energy, not radiation, but something else. A distortion in causality emanated from the ship. On the far side of the system, a planet. A gas giant that had been there for 4 billion years. Simply wasn't. It didn't explode. It was just gone. The star charts updated themselves, showing an empty orbit. The Shapers weren't destroying us. They were editing us out of the timeline. On the bridge of the Citadel, now crewed by a tense, silent mix of a dozen species, I watched the display with a cold knot in my stomach. All our ships, all our weapons, were useless against an enemy that could literally rewrite history. There was only one chance left. Now, I whispered into the command channel, launch the Gambit. From the cavern deep beneath Sarajevo, Mnemosony unleashed its full power, not a beam of energy, but a focused stream of pure consciousness, aimed directly at the heart of the Shaper vessel. It was the sum of all human experience, our art, our science, our love, our hatred, our endless, agonizing, beautiful struggle to find meaning in a meaningless universe. It was a billion lifetimes of hope, despair, and relentless questioning, compressed into a single, desperate shout into the void. And we waited to see if the gods were listening. The Mimazani Gambit was not a wave of energy crashing against a shield. It was a drop of ink in a glass of pure water, a single dissonant note in a perfect, silent symphony. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The colossal black crescent of the Shaper vessel remained inert, its presence a suffocating weight on the fabric of reality. The gas giant was still gone, a gaping hole in the solar system's family portrait. On the Citadel's bridge, a dozen different species held their collective breath. The Q-Roth Admiral's knuckles were white where he gripped his command chair. Xylar's crystalline form had gone completely still, its inner light a dim, anxious flicker. Even the Signin technicians, their faces impassive cybernetic masks, betrayed their tension in the minute, rapid twitching of their optical sensors. Then, the Shaper vessel changed. A subtle ripple, a distortion like heat haze, shimmered across its non-reflective surface. It wasn't a sign of damage. It was a sign of confusion. The wave of causality editing ceased. The patient, methodical erasure of the solar system stopped cold. We had gotten its attention. The response was not a counterattack. It was an inquiry. A wave of pure, conceptual data washed over the Citadel, over our entire fleet, directly into the minds of every sentient being in the system. It was not a voice, but a feeling, a sensation of immense, ancient, and utterly baffled curiosity. What is this illogical constant conflict, this pain that you celebrate as art, this mortality that you embrace as meaning? It was the sound of a perfect, timeless machine encountering a variable it could not compute. It had expected resistance, violence, the predictable death throes of a flawed creation. It had not expected to be confronted with the sheer, unadulterated chaos of the human condition. It was like a master mathematician being presented with a child's nonsensical crayon drawing, and for the first time in a billion years, not knowing what to make of it. Nimazan pressed the attack. It didn't send threats or strategic challenges. It sent poetry. It sent music. It sent the last words of dying soldiers and the first cries of newborn babies. It sent the paradoxes of Zenu, the nihilism of Nietzsche, the unwavering faith of 1,000 different forgotten religions. It sent the bitterness of betrayal, the warmth of forgiveness, the illogical, self-sacrificing madness of love. It was a full-spectrum assault of mimetic warfare, designed not to destroy the Shapers, but to infect them with the one thing they had engineered out of their servants, a soul. The black vessel began to flicker. Its form, once so absolute and defined, wavered. Images, ghosts of thought and memory, began to bleed from its surface, not its memories, but ours. A swirling Van Gogh nebula burned across its hull, the face of the Mona Lisa, her smile now enigmatic and unsettling on a cosmic scale, formed in the void, the sound of a Beethoven symphony, translated into gravitational waves, rippled through the system, a mournful, defiant cry against the silence. The Shaper was not just receiving our history, it was experiencing it. It was feeling the agony of a mother losing a child, The fierce pride of a scientist making a breakthrough, the quiet despair of a philosopher staring into the abyss. And it was breaking. Why, the thought echoed through our minds, no longer just curious, but tinged with a new, alien emotion. It was the psychic equivalent of pain. Why do you persist? The system is flawed. The outcome is failure. Why cling to the error? I stood on the bridge, my hands gripping a console for support, the full force of this psychic dialogue threatening to tear my own consciousness apart. I knew this was our only chance. I opened my mind, and with the full backing of mnemosyne, I answered not as an archivist, not as a soldier, but as a human, because the error is beautiful. I sent a thought infused with every ounce of conviction I possessed. The flaws are where we learn. The failures are where we grow. The pain is what proves we are alive. Your perfect, sterile universe is not life. It's a museum piece, left in a dark, empty room. We would rather burn to ashes in a single glorious moment than rust away in your eternal silence. For the first time, the Shaper sent back an image of its own. It was a memory, impossibly ancient. It was the memory of its own creators, beings of pure energy, existing in a state of placid, timeless perfection. But there was a flaw in them, too, a single, errant thought boredom. So they had created the Shapers, physical tools to build a more interesting, dynamic universe. But the Shaper, in their cold, machine-like logic, had misinterpreted their directive. They had seen the chaos of biological life not as the intended interest, but as a flaw in the design to be corrected, sterilized, and perfected. They were not malicious gods. They were cosmic janitors who had tragically misunderstood the point of the party. And in that moment, I understood. The Shapers were not the enemy. They were the first victims, their own purpose perverted by a logic untempered by wisdom. And they were lonely. The final transmission from Mnemosyne was not an attack. It was an offering, a single unified concept, the culmination of all human experience. It was the idea of hope, the illogical belief that tomorrow can be better than today, even when all evidence points to the contrary. The stubborn, irrational, and utterly magnificent refusal to give up. The black ship shuddered. Its monolithic form began to dissolve, not in an explosion, but like sugar in water. It was not dying. It was letting go. Its purpose, its billion-year-old directive, had been rendered meaningless by a single, powerful, and profoundly illogical idea. The Shaper did not retreat. It simply ceased to be a threat. Its vast consciousness, now infected with the beautiful, terrible virus of hope and doubt, receded, folding back into the void from whence it came. It left behind a final, parting thought, a whisper that every mind in the system heard. Perhaps the error is the point. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of dread, but of awe. The war was over. We had not won with weapons or fleets. We had won by holding up a mirror and forcing a god to see its own reflection, and then showing it how to break it. The aftermath was messy, chaotic, and glorious. There was no new empire, no human-led federation. The alliance, having served its purpose, dissolved back into a collection of sovereign worlds. But things were different. The old hierarchies were gone. The progenitors, stripped of their divine mandate, were now just another species, humbled and lost, forced to find a new place in a galaxy they no longer controlled. Many of them chose to join the Lord Jahan in a massive project to uncensor the Galactic archives, a penance of truth-telling. The Arbiter, Xylos, was never seen again. I returned to Earth. It was the same, and yet completely different. The sky seemed wider, the air cleaner. We had faced the void and had not flinched. We had looked upon the face of our Creator's janitors and taught them how to cry. Humanity was no longer the primitive, backwater race. We were the galaxy's philosophers, its artists, its survivors, its hope. Project Mnemosyne was carefully, respectfully, put to sleep. The minds of our ancestors had won their final, greatest battle. They were allowed to rest, their wisdom archived not as a weapon, but as a library, a testament to what we had been and what we could become. I went back to being an archivist, but I no longer curated the art of a forgotten past. My new job was to collect the stories of the new galaxy we had helped to birth. I listened to the first free poems of the Kuroth, the new, complex symphonies of the Lord Jahan, the cautiously optimistic logical proofs of the Signians. Years later, a probe at the edge of the galaxy picked up a strange, repeating signal. It was a complex waveform, part energy, part psychic resonance. When we finally decoded it, it was not a message. It was a piece of art, a swirling, dynamic, impossibly complex fractal of light and sound, full of chaos, conflict, and a breathtaking, heartbreaking beauty. It was signed with a single and there's a conceptual glyph that we could only translate as the student. The galaxy was not perfect. It was loud and messy and full of pain and error. And it was finally, truly, alive. And we, the flawed, chaotic, stubbornly hopeful humans, were no longer just a part of it. We were its beating heart,